Okay. Dear ladies and gentlemen. You're here. Okay. No. Please. Yeah, take your time. But I was asked to start German punctually, because we have to finish right at the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this final session of a, well, long or short 3 days conference. I think it was rather short, but obviously time is something of an individual choice in this respect. Our topic will be strategies and possible measures to combat disinformation. And we will have 4 distinguished speakers on this topic. I would just like to warm up you with the latest from Russian disinformation, or as it is technically called, foreign information manipulation and interference, FIMI. I mean, everything has an abbreviation, of course, but this is the technical term, foreign information manipulation and interference. And just 3 of the latest. According to the Kremlin, steered the TV channel 1 in a report on 15th January, in the Volyn region of northwestern Ukraine, a Russian Orthodox church allegedly has been set on fire. Ukrainians are inhuman and satanic, as the commentators burst. It is interesting that the word satanic is pretty frequently used. I mean, it reminds us of the 19th century rather than, or maybe the beginning of the 20th century with the anti-Semitic campaigns. And it is frequently reused now in the 21st century. Even Mr. Putin couldn't refrain from talking of satanic West. And the story was, of course, a mere invention, crafted with pictures from another location, as usually, and other times, and of course of different circumstances. So the video was cut in a way, as usually, that helped getting the message across to the viewer in the designed and drafted way. First time, but this is interesting as well, the story emerged in a pretty remote Telegram channel, Riadovac News. I think no one really knows that. And it was then, in the next days, climbing up its way, finally being used by media with the biggest range of influence. And the disinformation analysts, this is interesting, estimate that it got a scope of 100 million people watching this video and getting the message. And it was not only, it was mainly Russian, but it was not only Russian, it was Spanish and Arabian too, because it was transferred into these languages, and of course in European countries. It doesn't say something about the impact. This is something different, but I think it's interesting to have a tiny, tiny, tiny thing popping up on Telegram, going way up to TV1 and being spread in a way like this. So barbaric Ukrainians setting churches on fire. Then the next thing, I think it's just a few days ago, Ukraine allegedly has dropped warfare, biological warfare via drones. Russia is, of course, neatly investigating it, and it's a repetition of something that we have for some quiet time. Ukraine is a nuclear, a biological, and a chemical threat. We have it all over and over again, and it pops up at certain time. And then the last one, this is by the author Ilia State. He wrote a few days ago in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung an article that a new, I would say, a new technique comes up by faking covers of satire magazines, like Charlie Hebdo. Everyone knows it, I mean, you know, from the Islamic bombing and raiding. Charlie Hebdo, the German Titanic, the American Mad magazine. So they use it as a new tool. Roughly 20 or so incidents of this occurred, updated, and the message is always the same. I mean, the technique or the medium is new, but the it is always the same message: Ukrainian Nazis rule and Europeans are sick of helping them. Maybe I gave to the lady at the Technique the paper was written a website. And this is interesting. You can follow this day by day in monthly reports. Is set up by the European Diplomatic Service, and it gives you a wonderful, well, not wonderful, I mean, it's disgusting, but it gives you quite a very good insight of what is happening on a day-to-day basis with monthly reviews. And now, I think 2 or 3 days ago, there was even published a year's review on disinformation campaigns and how to deal with it. And I think this using of image and abusive texts and words, I would say, is rather a good situation to come to our first speaker and presenter, because he is very much working with images, with music, and with pictures, doing this disinformation. And I would like to present Dr. Manuel López Torán. He's a PhD in modern history of Europe and an assistant professor and researcher at the University of, I hope I pronounce it right, Castilla-La Mancha. Perfect. Okay, in Spain. He is specialized in the study of modern wars through 2 research lenses. The first is visual propaganda, and the second one is playing with emotions, as I might say. In order to preserve an international approach, he has made several academic stays in France, in Germany, and in Belgium. And he is a member of the Occupation Studies Research Network based at the University of Maastricht that brings together experts from more than 15 countries. So, very warm welcome to you, and the floor is yours.
Well, I will start. Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be here participating in this interesting conference, and where we are dealing with such remarkable questions. As you can imagine, according to the title of my intervention, I will talk in the last minutes about this information about propaganda, but essentially about social media. And our starting point won't be last year, won't be 2022, but it will be the first years of the last century. Because for a long time, the way in which the daily life of wars was transmitted to society has been a constant concern of belligerent countries. Press, photography, postcards, radio, and television has been exposed to strong controls to ensure what information was appropriated to be spread. The 21st century wars began to be fought in the digital world. It implies that we are appreciating in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they take a rich heritage from the propaganda campaigns of the wars of the last century, but they adapt it to create new rules, new codes, and new language for future and present warfare. The internet and social networks brought the traditional channels of information. In this sense, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Telegram, and even TikTok have become new battlefronts where the weapon used are the weapon used are images, videos, characters, emoticons, or hashtags. Due to this new situation, the channels of information has been widely diversified, and they have become the center of information and disinformation strategies and propaganda campaigns. Irretrievably, this situation has brought changes to the way in which the war is perceived by the population. Moreover, the use of these digital weapons implies the need to develop new strategies to combat them. In this sense, since the invasion of Ukraine started last year, we have detected how the war has had a direct effect on the functioning of social media. In this sense, there's no doubt that this is an element that needs to be analyzed because of the implications that it will have in the future warfare. In this sense, this research is based on the analysis of more than 1,000 posts that were published during the first 6 months of war in 3 social networks: Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, by official accounts and by individual profiles. With this background, this contribution pursues 4 objectives. First of all, to determine how these social networks have emerged as new digital battlefields in which belligerent countries fight to win support from global society. Secondly, to compare the strategies followed by Russia and Ukraine in each social networks, as well as the discourses that were being disseminated during these 6 months. To understand how the general public, especially young people, are perceiving the events and the role that social media is having in this perception, and finally, to present the strategies used to combat disinformation in each social network, in order to give some evidence of how the digital war is being prepared for the new threats that modern warfare has brought with it. When I designed this intervention, I decided to present the conclusion and analysis on each of these 4 axes in order to adapt my speech to the time I was given. So regarding the first objective, we can conclude that based on the analysis gathered from the 1,000 publications that I analyzed, it has been possible to establish a clear continuity of strategies with regard to the dissemination of information and disinformation. First of all, it has been found that social networks have successfully absorbed the function that were once performed entirely by other social media. In this sense, we can conclude that social networks are a faithful vehicle for war propaganda as other media did in the battles fought in the 20th century. In this sense, it has been remarkable appreciating how this new media follow all rules used in the past, creating a new language. For example, I will give some evidence. This new war propaganda continues to appear in the form of cartoons. As we could see yesterday during the wonderful presentation of Alina Motolewska, cartoon is still present in this war. It was a cartoon published in The Guardian in the first days of March of last year. When I firstly saw this cartoon, I quickly thought about an old postcard that I could see when I was doing one of my research in Paris. And Putin is shown as, with a long list, as you can see here in this first slide, with all the casualties from Ukraine. And he is presented as the main guilt, as in 1914, the Kaiser was presented in this postcard denouncing the destruction of French cities in the first month of the Great War. And this is, I think that it is, you can appreciate the comparison between both moments. Apart from that, another old strategy that I have identified in the new war is the tendency to show the weaponry use. On this occasion, the continuity is easily visible between these 2 examples. On the left side, we can see George Patton with a Renault tank in France in July 1918, and on the right side, a TikTok video uploaded by probably the most famous Ukrainian soldier to TikTok, so with a missile launcher behind him. And finally, one of the other traditional demands of propaganda is to show the development of hostilities on the front line, naturally, sensibly modified, and not as it happens in reality. The objects, as you can appreciate, change over time, but the message still remains independently the media used. So after confirming how the images distributed are roots in the main strategy lines used in the conflicts fought over the last century, we will now look at the specific elements on which each side has based its own discourse. So in the next part of my intervention, I will try to show you some of the main strategies used in order to present to the global society. In Ukraine, for example, one of the most powerful campaigns that happened during the first month of the war was the aim to gain the international support. So we can see here a tweet published by the official government, Ukrainian government, and as you can see, it was seen by more than 23,000 people. So we can see, we can appreciate the dimension of this new media. Apart from that, we can see how runes still one of the most powerful messages to be distributed. Here, with a specific, as we will see in the third part of my intervention, with a specific codes, adding music instead of the original sounds. Apart from that, in Ukraine, we will, we saw this the same picture yesterday, and I was so happy to see it yesterday too, because it confirmed something that I could prove last year, is that it will probably become one of the images that will remain in the future when this terrible war will end and we will look back. I will be sure that it will be some of the images that will remain in the popular culture in Europe and the rest of the world. And well, this short video, it's just 1 minute long, but in that video we can condense most of the ideas that were distributed during those days. Stop Russia, first of all, and the intention to make this conflict not just a local conflict, but an international conflict. We have seen the word shield, and this word appeared in one of the panels of the first day. Ukraine is the shield of Europe right now, so it's not a local conflict, it's an international conflict. So everyone is involved in this war, and we must be involved in this war. But what happens with Russia?
Привет, я Марк.
Я Света.
Я Дима.
Я Саша.
А я Женя. В моей работе главная собранность.
Главное — улыбка.
У меня вообще ненормированный график. А я часто работаю по ночам.
И это здорово.
Ну что, поехали.
Россия.
Это я.
This video was posted during the first days of March, and we see it in the official Russian government account, and we can appreciate the total difference of language in each social media. In the case of Ukraine, we see weapons, we see this, how the population is suffering. But if we take this into account, we see a kind of strategy like nothing happens here. Everything remains as always. We are not involved in any kind of war crime, or we are not involved in any war. And the same regarding, for example, in my country, in Spain, one of the most powerful propaganda campaigns belongs to the Russian embassy, and they use the same strategy. Nothing happens here, and we are not that guilty country that you are trying to present. And regarding the third objective, we can see that another interesting point that has been verified is how social network has brought a specific way to transmit the information of war. For example, they create a new sound sphere. As in the 20th century, for example, with new reels, the intention during the Cold War, for example, the intention was to transport people to the exact place where the battles were taking place. Here we see the same images, but with different sound, with different songs, for example, famous songs, and with not the original sound. So we are appreciating how the perception of war is being modified due to their distribution through social media. For example, here we can see a short video of Ukrainian soldiers and it is obvious that the original sound is not there, so they create a new sound sphere in order to transmit that messages. And finally, regarding the fourth objective of this part of the intervention, I will talk about how this social media is also taking this situation into account and modifying the policy privacy or the functioning of these social networks. For example, we see that in Ukraine, in order to combat disinformation, President Zelensky has emerged as one of the diary format campaign. We can see that their video has 2 million reproduction, so we can appreciate the dimension of this powerful communication strategy. Apart from that, we can see that some of these social networks have sensitive content, so we cannot access directly to that information, but we need to make sure that we want to see it. And finally, to conclude, we can see, for example, in the case of TikTok, how they have officially take different measures to combat this situation, and an update appeared in April of last month, and they say, I will try to summarize this in 2 seconds, they say that they will combat firmly the distribution of disinformation and fake news. So to conclude, we can appreciate that the relation between war and social media is bidirectional, because we see how war is being modified, the transmission of war is being modified by social networks, and we have also seen how social media is also being modified because of war. So thank you for your attention, and I will be attending your questions. Thank you so much.
Itself by contents and by form fits completely together, because I think it was not by accident, yeah, that you do it. Yeah, I would be, just for the first question, I thought of, does the new media change the way of information and disinformation in a, I would say, substantial or in a basic way? Or do you think, at one point you said, you have old wars or new wars and old topics. On the other hand, you say new media is influencing the war and the war is influencing new media. So I would say there is a certain difference between these two ideas and thesis. So what would be your answer?
Well, thank you. I don't know if it's working.
Yeah, you have to start. Just start, and at some point it works.
Okay. Oh yeah, I have here a new one. Thank you so much. No. Hi. Yeah, now. So thank you so much for your question. Yeah, the thing is that we have appreciated, and this is something that I quickly noticed when I started doing this research last year, that most of the strategies are rooted in the propaganda campaigns of the last century. For example, it's like it's not anything new in this sense. For example, most of the three most powerful strategies are regarding the events of the war. For example, first of all, the dimension of the devastation. This is something that was, I don't know if this word is properly in English, like systematized, or, well, it was something that firstly appeared in a great scale during the First World War, especially in France and Belgium. And this is something that we have seen since the first weeks of war in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And for example, there's also something that we have not seen in this invasion, like the first line of the battlefield. We have no access to what is happening, at least in a visible content about what it is happening in that front line. We just see the devastation of the Ukrainian cities, but we don't see what is actually happening in the front line of the war. So this is something that we can compare quickly to the wars that were fought in the last century. But apart from that, we have seen how they used these old strategies, because they follow these same strategies, but they adapted to these new circumstances or these new ways to be spread. For example, with the sounds that I wanted to show you, and this is something that I mentioned. If we see some of the most famous newsreels of the Cold War, we can see how the principal purpose of these newsreels, these video approaches to the combat in Korea, for example, or in Vietnam, we could see how the most interesting thing was transporting the American population or the Spanish population or the British population to the effects that were, to the events that were taking place there with the original sound. So it was the obsession to access directly to that part, having the sound, sonic inputs that could take place there. But here we are seeing how they add this new music, these new sounds. So this is something that is based in all the strategies, but they create this new dimension, because it's something that it is changed. We don't see the sound of the bombs. We don't hear the sound of the bombs. We hear this kind of sounds. In TikTok rules, we say like trending TikTok sounds, which are on trend during this week. So this is something that that I have appreciated regarding this new situation. So it is rooted in these old strategies, but it is adapted to the rules of the new media.
Yeah, thank you. So questions from your side?
Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have a question regarding the, how would I say, editing of the images on the media that we see, and the kind of bombardment of the images of any and every quality. I can understand that, of course, we live in the digital media where everybody is a photographer, everybody is a filmographer, and etc. But if we think about images that stay with us, for example, from the time of Vietnam War, the images of a girl running from napalm taken by a Kappa, and the whole role of the war photographers, for example, who obviously were journalists, who also were incredibly professional, and those images, they stay with us forever because of their quality. Do you think that this oversupply, if you like, of images that come unedited, I don't want to use the word professional because everybody has a voice, as we know, but not everybody is a poignant photographer. So do you think that these images will stay with us, or do they sort of provide an supply and bombard us so that we become immune because we see it so much?
Well, thank you so much. This is a question that I really appreciate because it is a question that I make myself every day. And I wish I could have the answer, but I think that the problem is that everything is absolutely new. So I think we don't still have the mind of the perception to know what will happen in the future. That's true that I think that it is nothing to compare to the situation that you mentioned, because you were really right when you mentioned Kappa, for example. It's like everything thinks about Kappa when he or she thinks about the Spanish Civil War, or the press images about the Korea or Vietnam War. But I don't think so that will happen in the same way regarding this war, because everything now comes and goes really quickly. So that's a problem. And there's something I remember being with experts about digital heritage, and they mentioned that we will probably have a big problem with all these things which are digital, because we don't know how they are held. We don't know where they go apart from the time it's on trend. So I think it's a problem, and yeah, as I mentioned before, this is something that I think about it every day. But I think I at least at this moment, I don't have a proper answer. Maybe next year or in 2 years, I will be able to answer it. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, because of time reasons, I think we have to go on to the next speaker. Maybe, yeah. We going?
Yes, we're going.
Yeah, okay. And so the next speaker is Professor Malkhaz Toria. He's an associate professor of history and the director of the Memory Studies Center in Caucasus in Ilia State University in Tbilisi. His research interests are quite diversified, and I don't want to enumerate them all for this conference. I would like to name especially his research on the role of historical discourse and memory politics in regional conflicts in Georgia. Since fall 2019, he has embarked on pursuing a doctoral degree in sociology at the New School of Social Research and studying how contested historical narratives and primordial historical imaginaries still fuel and contribute to ongoing conflicts in post-totalitarian society, including his own country. Mr. Toria.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I greatly appreciate to have the opportunity to talk to the audience. I think it's an interesting pressing issue, and the conference theme is addresses urgent problem of audience of the war and the representation, and especially in the context of when we are caught between the debates between left and right, and at the same time, simultaneously, far right take advantages which is the valued gift for Putin, for instance, and other authoritarian leaders elsewhere. So it's a time when we are witnessing ethnocentric, exclusive nationalism, and ethno-religious right-wing populism, conservative LGBTQ, anti-LGBTQ propaganda, and generally the whole spectrum of anti-democracy sign. So recently, since my case is Georgia, and the process was going on in contemporary Georgia, I would like to just bring an example of like 2 days and a week ago, Slavoj Žižek gave an interview to the Radio Free Georgia, and he talked about Putin, and the title was "The denazification should start in Putin's Kremlin, not elsewhere." So, and he kind of criticizes abstract pacifism of lefts, for instance, and also he calls Putin as a global catastrophe. So now, to turn to the Georgian case, what I can say, so not giving to Georgia, for instance, the whole candidacy like Ukrainians got or Moldova the last time, it caused a sort of frustration within Georgian society, which were kind of or are dedicated to this Euro-Atlantic aspiration and the whole troubles, what happened in Georgia, like beginning from 19th or 20th century, we were connected to this geopolitical repositioning and attempt to detach from former imperial core. So the Georgian society, the part of the liberal democratic sort of segment of society, were kind of frustrated because this whole sacrifices made were not given attention, and this is the chance. This sort of frustration is a chance for far-right anti-democratic forces, which fundamentally are aligned with Putin's Russia. They try to invade Georgian public space and discourse. All this starts from 2008, when a war in Georgia, Russia invaded Georgia. It was the first test for Putin and the kind of testing how the West would react. And you all remember that the West pretty much kind of ignored this problem, and there was no sanctions against Russia. And then Crimea and the Donbass, this problem followed. So that's why I'm considering Ukraine and Georgia in the same kind of line. And yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, Wilfried Jill pointed that Europe almost blamed Georgia for attacking Russia in 2008. So this issue is directly related to the problem of agency, about which Professor Portnow said very eloquently yesterday, right? So it's not about NATO membership or EU aspiration. It's about not recognizing Ukrainian and Georgian agency as societies which are pursuing their own goals to emancipate from Russian and Soviet imperial and colonial legacy. So this so-called theory of lines between Russia and the West, the red lines, is a clear indication of this fundamental ignorance of those who suffer from Russia's imperial ambitions. And after the war started in Ukraine last year, this situation is changing, and this conference is a clear indication of this. So I intend to illustrate how Russian disinformation strategies has permitted the contemporary Georgia's historical and political discourse and give rise to right-wing populism. Here I would like to outline a little bit my conceptual framework. I kind of follow, for instance, Andrew Aratos and others' complex reflection on the populism, which is the most important symptoms of crisis of democracy. So I draw Ernesto Laclau, Margaret Canavan, Chantal Mouffe, and others perception too. So some elements emphasize this populist strategy as a political mobilization for attaining or retaining governmental power by appealing to popular sovereignty, or by the rhetorical and ideological construction of the empty signifier, so-called empty signifier, the people. And by symbolic representation of the whole, the people. So all these right-wing forces kind of try to represent the whole people, not their own particular interest, of course. What is important, the populist fits in a repertoire of discursive and stylistic features, a range of culturally specific features to construct imaginations of the people, like, for instance, self-proclaimed national leaders, leaders of these movements kind of frequently have reference to the nation, the history, the people, the church, Georgian Orthodox Church, are the main kind of conceptual repertoire of these forces. So how it's connected to Putin and post-truth and Russian disinformation? What the truth generally? How can we kind of have the claim to the fundamental truth in a situation when, as Pomerantsev said, nothing is true and everything is possible in a situation. So overall, Putin's imperial sublime includes Soviet nostalgia, as you are well aware of it. At the same time, he is distinguished to be a patron of anti-Western rhetoric of the so-called Russian world. The Russian world is the ideological construct, a self-sufficient universe united by the Russian language, a common mentality, a shared historical legacy, a specific system of values, Orthodox Christianity, etc. So these ideas kind of underpin his historical insinuations concerning the history of Ukraine and Georgia, derailing their right to statehood, saying that they are not states, they are, the part of Russian Empire. And it's a pity that before the war in Ukraine, even in the West, in New York, for instance, some major research institutions repeated this imperial kind of conceptual kind of references. Of course, not in a radical way. So in Georgia, there's particular forces I would like to name, for instance, Alliance of Patriots of Georgia, Georgian March, or other individual figures, and especially the recent one, Alt-Info, who illustrate Georgian right-wing nativist movements. And the Alt-Info, for instance, is particularly interesting force because they are not shy to tell that they want Russia to win in Ukraine because they are anti-Western, anti-LGBT, and anti of everything which kind of distorts the true spiritual universe of Orthodox Christianity, for instance. War in Ukraine is a new challenge for democratic climate in Georgia. It is widely discussed in Georgian academia and among political experts and in the media that ongoing war in Ukraine deepened the political and societal polarization in Georgia and exacerbated the schism between Georgia's mostly pro-Western foreign policy expert community and the government's balanced foreign policy. In terms of foreign policy, for instance, the Russia-Ukraine war exposed the limits of the balancing foreign policy of Georgia's ruling party. While they're supporting, of course, pro-Ukraine resolutions in international organizations, the Georgian government did not join sanctions against Russia. So they kind of justify this moment as a kind of moderate reaction of the Russia-Ukraine war to avoid dragging the Georgia into the war, because we are vulnerable. We cannot, resist if Russia invades Georgia. So they have this sort of pragmatic, but Georgian society, the many kind of voice for more solidarity in Ukraine. So a right-wing anti-Western group has dramatically expanded its presence in Georgia just as Russia's invasion in Ukraine happened. So this alt-info was established in 2020 in November, and they rapidly started to grow in number, their offices. So these are they have illiberal views which are drawn from religious conservatism, and it also advocates friendlier ties with Russia. And I would finish the one clear example of the scandal which happened like a week ago. My colleague at Ilia State University, which I represent here, my colleague, quite a prominent philologist and Soviet dissident, was about to deliver a lecture in a regional town in Georgia, and the alt-right, the alt-info group kind of prevented him to do so. And why? Because he criticized the 18th century king of Georgia, Eastern Georgia, who made a treaty with Russian Empire, and he said that he was a traitor, he would not do that. The king Irakli II kind of made a treaty with Russia, and Georgia became a protectorate of Russian Empire at the time, and then the Caucasus, whole incorporation of Caucasus happened. And these far-right groups claim that this Western agent is kind of saying bad things about traditions, about cherished kings, or they kind of derail our traditional value, and they are trying to project. They are trying to project. I have 2 minutes. Project this Western propaganda and anti-Russian and anti-Russian kind of position, which is not true Georgian position at all. So I try to sketch up the outline of the political and cultural landscape, societal landscape in Georgia, to just warn or express the warning that elsewhere in Europe or in America, the rise of far-right movements and illiberal populism is quite pretty much existent in these places, in such places like Georgia, and it is directly connected with the Russian and Putin's interest to undermine democracy. That was my, short talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malkhaz Toria. I think you had quite a very difficult task because, to be honest, I mean, my way to deal with Georgian politics told me that it is one of the most complicated things you can delve with. Yeah? It is such a difficult and diverse society, and so it's quite an adventurous thing to put it up in 15 minutes. Yeah? So thanks a lot. I would like to follow immediately with the next presentation because we are a bit running out of time and we have to finish punctually. So question and answers would be then by the end of all the speakers. I'm happy to introduce Professor Florian Abraham right now. He is a PhD with a habilitation in history He's director of the National Institute for the Study of Totalitarianism of the Roman Academy and associate professor in political science at the Faculty of Communications at the National University of Political Science and Public Administration, Bucharest. He also served as a member of the board of the National Council for the Study of the Securitate Archives, NCSAA, which I think is very interesting in our context in Bucharest from 2012 to 2018. So I would say he somehow delved into the center of disinformation politics in Romania during the Ceausescu period. His most recent book, together with Bartosz Dziewanowski, Stefańczyk, as an editor, directly leads to our panel. I would say it bears the title Disinformation in Memory Politics, Theory, Policy and Practice in Europe. It is about to be published, and we are very curious to hear from you before it is in the bookstores.
No, thank you very much. I am glad to be here. Even I am the penultimate speaker, I think will be important, the question of the Romania, because we have the longest border between the EU and the Ukraine, and also we have the second largest migrants, war refugees in the soil of the Romania. So in order to understand the narrative, I think it is very important to understand the environment, the context in which narratives take place. So, in fact, Romania, like Poland, or mostly like Poland, we have we are on the big dilemma, or population, citizens are on the big dilemma. First, because Russia is considered to be traditional enemy, and it was a kind of commonplace to say, okay, Romanian soil was invaded by 12 times along the history by Russian army. So I think it was enough, and we are not so good friends with Russia. But also, on the other hand, are still vivid the question of the consequences of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. And the question is, why Greater Romania has no longer available because of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact? And where are the parts of the Greater Romania are now on the territory of Ukraine? So this is the question that are inside of the Romanian social and historical memory. And I mentioned here, it is important that we have a very long length of border, longer from the EU member states, longer than Poland or other states, with Ukraine. And this generate itself an imagery regarding the neighbor. From the political point of view, the moment of 1997 was very important because Romania pushed to go to NATO, and one of the preconditions was, okay, you will become available to join to NATO and the EU when you finish all the problem with, or possible problem with the neighbors. And at that moment was a very complicated moment from political point of view, because signing a treaty with Ukraine means to accept the consequences of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which Romanian Parliament declared after 1990 that it's without any consequences. So, from the political point of view, we have Romania have a choice to remain with the unsolved problem with Ukraine, or to look into the future in order to say, okay, we respect the border, we respect what happened, assume this fact, and we are going to join to the EU and the NATO. And this was a problem, and the Treaty of the Relations of Good Neighborhood of Cooperation between Romania and Ukraine, this is the official name, was signed, but was very harsh criticized at that moment, and it was after that. And the question, the hot topic, it's the issue of Romanian minority, or to not say Romanian, to say Neo-Latin, if you want, my community in Ukraine. To not say minority, to say community, if you want. And according to last Ukraine census, we have two communities, apparently different. Romanians and Moldovans. What are Moldovans? Was a creation of Stalinist times in which the people who speak Romanian, I understand without translation, Moldovans. I make a break at that here. From Chisinau, we have a very interesting dictionary, Moldovan-Romanian dictionary. I read it, and main difference it is how to spell the words. In fact, the same words are the same. The words are the same, but they create a dictionary to common understanding between Romanian and Moldovans. So, Romania, Neo-Latin community from Ukraine are the third largest group in Ukraine, and after Ukrainians and Russians. And now we are, and this will explain the narratives, we are on the ongoing process in which from Ukraine we have the process of, I want to be very careful with the words, but in fact, if we are not in the context of the words, we could spell as a politics of assimilation of minorities, because we have three Parliament drafted three laws. One, it is in 2017, second is in 2019, and the third in December, in which, by this law, the rights for the cultural identity of the minorities are less and less possible. And it was a joke, but not entire jokes, that Romanian, to learn Romania, it's like to learn Chinese or Korean in Ukraine, even it's your mother tongue. So this generates a political debate in Romania, and President Saxon, President of the Romania, Klaus Iohannis, in a phone debate with President of the Ukraine, expressed his deep concern about this law. You are here, many people with a diplomatic experience, and you know what means deep concern. Okay, the next slide. Now, to understand what is the official and not just official position of Romania against the aggression. We not say war, we say, for the beginning, aggression. So, from official position by the president, government, the parliament, we defend the Ukraine and condemn the aggression of the Russian Federation. It's very clear, this official position. And the government and civil society became involved in supporting the war refugees. And I remember in my former capacity as a personal advisor of the Minister of Health that in February I was personally involved on creating the mechanism to support the war refugees. Romania offered a full board of medical assistance even for the critical diseases and long-term diseases like cancer or other diseases by Romanian resources. And since February 10, more than 3.5 million Ukrainian citizens have entered in Romania. Also, Romania supports international and EU sanctions against the Russian Federation, despite our economic losses. Just now in Romania, it's a debate, okay, what will happen, because we're facing the problem of the dumping prices of cereals from Ukraine, dumping prices of milk from Ukraine, dumping prices or other products from Ukraine, and it became more and more a political problem. Officially, Romania does not send weapons to Ukraine, and this was undisputable question. And also in the context of the war, the budget for military spending was increased, and this is important because also Romania facing other economic and social problems, even in the health care system. It was okay, we will direct money for the military. And arrived in Romania French, American troops, including the famous 101st Airborne Division is now a part of this division. It is located in Romania. Here are some visual materials, help for Romania, Brasov for Ukraine, Ukrainians and Romania work and live together. And the second will be a commissioner of Home Affairs here in Romania to discuss with the war refugees. And now, what are the public opinion? Okay. It was a barometer, security barometer of Romania. It was made by the Institute of Political Science. And I don't discuss too much on the detail, but you can read. But the idea is that it is a division inside of the public opinion regarding the war. What do you think, one of the questions, what do you think about the information circulating today in our country about the war in Ukraine? And the people, they are generally correct, 45. They are inaccurate and favor Russia, 14%. And they are inaccurate and favor Ukraine, 24%. And now, to go to the substance, what it is so-called hegemonic, I don't put on the brackets hegemonic, but it is a hegemonic narrative. It is supported by the state political institution and the political parties, and also on the mainstream media. If you look at the main television, they almost in every day start with the war in Ukraine and deliver these kind of messages that Romania must support Ukraine because it is an aggressive state. Ukrainians must be helped because they are people in need, and it was behavior of a good Christian to help others. Also, from the official point of view, Romania supports Ukraine not just we are neighbor, but because it is the part of so-called the values of the Euro-Atlantic institutions. And what it is interesting, and the institutional political actors do not address the issue of differences between EU and NATO states regarding the Ukraine. What is the position of Hungary? What is the position of Germany? Is not debated in Romania. The mass media neutrally retells, offer day-by-day information about this, but not ask for the comments from political actors. Romania wants to end of the conflict and, of course, preserving the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Romania is not in conflict with Russia, and officially, as I mentioned, we don't deliver weapons. The topic of arming Ukraine is present in the media, but just in relation with others. Germans, Americans, French people, and the others. And now, teams of pro-Russian propaganda, the goals of Russian propaganda is to delegitimize the government and increase divisions in Romanian society. We could frame two kind of topics, international themes and local topics. International themes, Russia is stronger than NATO, so it cannot lose the war. The democratic regime, the European Union are decadent. The special operation is a consequence of the aggression of the West, of the failure to comply with the commitments made at the end of the Cold War. The application of international or EU sanctions hit the ordinary people, not the financial oligarchy or bureaucracy. And local topics, Romanians do not take into account the oppressions of Romanians in Ukraine. Romania should regain the territories lost through Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Romania is a colony of the West. Energy prices and inflation are higher because the West supports Ukraine, and the special operation is not ending quickly. And now regarding the actors and media tools, to respect the title of my speech. Starting from April last year, Russia Today and Sputnik were banned on the, I hope, on the entire EU, but I know for sure that it is in Romania. Also, Sputnik, 2 minutes. Sputnik Facebook and Telegram channels were shut down. Pro-Russian propaganda is carried through the channels. We have just images, news from Romania, Romania and Russia friendship, but with a very weak audience, And the conclusions, in fact, Romania behaves like a state in an unofficial war, if we are looking on the component of the communication. The media supports the government position, don't criticize too much. But in the society, the opinions are much more nuanced than the official ones. The pro-Russian propaganda did not find in the society a fertile ground of its messages because of the historical memory, as I explained. Public opinion is divided between sympathy of the victims of the war and the issue of the respecting the cultural identity of Romanians in Ukraine. The message of supporting Ukraine without involvement in arms transfer is supported by the government and mainstream media. The central theme of hegemonic narrative is resistance against an aggressor state. And the pro-Russian narrative circulates mainly online, being supported by anti-vaccinists. And it is a very close connection between anti-vaccinists and pro-Russians. Thank you very much. I hope it's not too long.
Thank you very much, Professor Abraham. We get a new aspect, especially by the minority case here, between Romanian Moldavians, so to say, and Ukrainians. But fortunately, it is my assumption, it is not as tense between Romania and Ukraine as it is between Hungary and Ukraine right now. So thanks a lot, for your presentation. And we come to the final speaker of our session. I welcome Dr. Łukasz Kamiński. He is a graduate of the Historical Institute of the University of Wrocław, and since 1999, assistant professor there. From 2011 to 16, he was president of the Institute of National Remembrance. He was no, I slipped the slide. President of the Institute of National Remembrance and is at present director of the Ossoliński National Institute in Warsaw. His research interests encompass the issues of opposition and social resistance to the communist regime, mainly in 1944 to 89. From his vast number of publications, I just want to name his contribution to the pioneering collective monograph of the communist apparatus of the repression in the countries of the Soviet bloc, which was published in English under the title A Handbook of the Communist Security Apparatus in Eastern Central Europe, and it was translated into German as well, Handbuch der kommunistischen Geheimdienste in Osteuropa. So you delved, as your colleague from Romania, into the archives and sources of disinformation. We are very pleased to have you.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for inviting me and giving me not an easy task to be a final presenter during such a tense conference. And during those last 3 days, we have discussed a lot of issues connected with the problems of weaponization of history, historical manipulation, historical disinformation, and the question appears if we could do something with this situation. What is a role of historian? Of course, I am fully aware not all of us are historians. Nobody is perfect, but feel free to feel like one. And I would like to start with a few quite obvious questions, but answers. But to do it, it would be better if I could have my presentation. Please. It was sent yesterday in the afternoon. So I hope I remember everything from this presentation. So not to waste time, I would like to start with a few quite obvious answers. So what we can do is to share our knowledge. First of all, our knowledge about the past, because if we are speaking about the sometimes neglected, or maybe better is better to say not seen disinformation in the field in history. I mean not seen from the political milieu. Sharing the knowledge about the most disputed elements of history of the past is really helping, because if people have knowledge, it's harder to manipulate them. But what we can do is also to share our knowledge, especially as contemporary historians, as you mentioned, about the mechanism of this information, because this information is not a new phenomenon. It reappeared after more or less 2 decades of not being so important thing. But in the past, it played a crucial role, for example, during the Cold War. And we have quite a good knowledge about the mechanism of Soviet disinformation. And the same mechanism are used now, of course, with other tools behind them. But we have this knowledge and we should share it. And of course, we should be engaged in exposing or debunking the historical disinformation. And one may ask, okay, this is what we are doing right now. Yes, we are discussing, all of us are probably publishing about this, but the problem is that it's not about this. It's about something different. The main battlefield of the current memory wars of historical disinformation are, of course, social media. So let us look a little bit on the reality. During the last few years, with my students, I have a quite new class called Digital History or e-History. Every year we are conducting a small survey. It's not a big research, just a small survey. We are analyzing the social media accounts of more or less 50 Polish historians. Almost all of them are historians of 19th and 20th century, so this is the area of the majority of disinformation. And the result every year is exactly the same. So social media accounts are used by historians to promote own research, own publications, etc., own presence in the media, etc. Secondly, to promote others' activities, colleagues, institutions, etc. Quite big part of our colleagues are involved in political dispute in Poland, unfortunately. Our political disputes are quite hot, so also historians are involved. On the fourth place, you see there is a private life, so pictures with cats, dogs, and from holidays, and only less than 10% of historians uses their presence in social media to fight disinformation, to share true information in case of new waves of disinformation. So it's a quite sad picture, I would say. We are not involved. Probably there are many reasons of this situation. For majority of us, social media are still something a little bit strange. We know that it's necessary to be there, to show the presence, to present our activities, etc. But we are not really engaged in the nature of this new media. There's a problem with the very nature of social media. Yes? There is, for example, no hierarchy. So any influencer who is known because he or she is just known, his or her voice could be much more important than professor of history. So we are a little bit afraid of this situation. Yes, so we are not used also to this form of debate. Yes, it's not an academic debate. There are plenty of emotions. And you need to express your thoughts in a very short way. So this is probably another reason. But I would like not stop here with this not very optimistic observation. And I think there is one more answer to the question: what is the role of historians? We can share our skills. Especially I'm talking about the source criticism, which is quite useful in the fight with disinformation. And it's not a just statement. It's supported by really hard evidence-based science. A few years ago, an experiment was conducted by the Stanford History Education Group, and they compared skills in dealing with disinformation in social media and generally in internet of three groups. Professional fact-checkers, of course, they were the best in everything. There were a few exercises. There is a result of one of them. Professional historians, but 40 plus, so not so young, and students of Stanford University. Quite prestigious university in United States, and there is a part of the results of coming from this experiment, and we can see that those students, which are digital-born generation, we usually call them, yes, they were born with smartphones in their hands. They had real problems with identifying this information, yes, and this. The task of those three groups in this experiment, part of experiment was to compare two websites and not connected with the history. Both of them were about the medicine, which is a reliable source of information, which is not. And only 20% of students were able to give the right answer, and 64 of them gave the completely wrong answer. They chose the fake news site as a most reliable source of information about the health and medicine. And we can see that those historians who are not so fluent, in searching, because the task was also to use Google and other tools which are available to verify those websites. So they're definitely not so fluent or doesn't have such a skills like students in this digital world. But anyway, half of them choose the right one, and only 10% choose the wrong one as a credible source. So to give us a few minutes for maybe some questions and for organizers to summarize our conference, I will stop here. And I hope I proved that everyone in the modern world should be a historian, at least to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you, Łukasz Kamiński, very much. I'm an historian, and of course, your speech made me a bit sentimental because I'm old-fashioned thinking that I would say historians are by profession bound to the truth, which is the opposite of we are discussing right now. So please, your questions. We have roughly 12 minutes. Is there any mic? Okay, please, for the lady here in the fourth row.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm thinking a lot. I'm Vera Dubina, and I've presented my paper yesterday. I'm thinking a lot about the role of historian in all these events and in media too. And for in 2011, I just organized a public history program in Moscow exactly for this same purpose. And I have some kind of question and comment too, yeah, because if I'm thinking a lot about how we can combat in this disinformation, what you propose. So if you want to put something about disinformation in the media, you promote this disinformation volus nollis too, yeah, because you need to put the sources, and probably for the media it's more important how many times you put this disinformation, and much more than that you're combating it in your special issue. So that's the problem, because of a lot of historians not try to do it in social media, or probably only in closed groups. And another thing is that we're also thinking a lot about how to make our students as public history program historians. Most of them, it's Magister, as a MA program, but most of them already started something else, physics, I don't know, humanities too, but mostly them from very different backgrounds. And I would say we don't manage to make this source criticism in these 2 years, because it is difficult. Yeah, how you can do it with the people who never touch the things. Yeah, so we see in this conference also. Yeah, the political scientists are speaking about Russia from the Middle Ages until now. So it's such as the same country, but it's not. Yeah, and historians know this. I mean,
so your question would be, how can you become, I mean, a source historian and someone with a right methodology to do things?
I mean, I think that's impossible, but we try it. Okay. But that's okay. My question. Probably you have a better idea.
Okay, who might? Łukasz, you might.
So starting with the first comment. It's a problem that we are not present as historians, but I think that there is a space to change this situation, because at least, of course, we will never be such a powerful like those disinformators are, because usually they're using so-called farms of trolls. They have bigger resources, etc., to share this information. But we should at least give people the chance to find the facts, the answer to this information. And you promoted this EU versus disinfo website, but unfortunately, it is almost not dealing with the historical disinformation. Yes,
really?
Yes, it's a small margin of its activities, so it's an issue. As I said, it's not seen as a problem from the world of politics. We have the same problem on our course of public history. It's also 2 years course, and with the students, part of them, half of them are not former students of baccalaureate history. But I am pretty sure that we can not only learn students during 2 years period of the way how historian thinks and do their analysis. But I am sure that even in secondary schools, we can teach pupils. It's, in fact, the whole issue is to ask, think critically and ask proper questions to the source of information. Yes, who wrote it? Why? Is it a credible source of information? Is it anonymous, or is there a real person behind it? 2 years ago, ENRS conducted a small project on disinformation, and we produced a guidebook and also some materials for teachers from secondary schools, how to use these skills of historians, of course, other methods to learn students, pupils in the school to fight disinformation, or rather not to be a victim of disinformation. So I believe, and it's based on my own experience, that it is possible to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Burkhard Ossoliński, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. I have one question to Florin and another one to Professor Torán. Florin, you mentioned, one of the pivotal points or the problems for Romania is a Romanian minority in Ukrainian. And my question would be, is there equivalence between how the Romanian or the Romanian governments regard then the Romanians in Ukrainian, and how do they feel there with their actual concrete circumstances and the reality the Romanians have in Ukrainian? But I assume there are also Romanian-Ukrainian marriages, or that the Romanians and Ukrainians see the reality of being in a country with a war. So is there a difference, or is it really that fact that there is just an equivalence towards the stance to the war and the attitude? This was one question.
Oh, please just stay with one. Yeah, because I mean we have maybe one. Okay, that would be nice. Thank you. Okay, Professor Abba.
Are we collecting questions or asking one by one? Because there are more.
Okay, then the last one, please, because we have to punctually finish.
Thank you. I'm Arkadiusz Radwan. I'm not a historian. I'm a lawyer, but my attitude to my own profession is more modest. We will be all replaced by artificial intelligence soon. And my question actually has to do with this, with algorithms. Because, José, your presentation, which I liked a lot, you presented some parallels in portraying different situations from World War I, World War II, and contemporary war in Ukraine. But I think there's a key difference, namely, back then, the outreach of the propaganda was basically limited to the local media, I mean the media of the country that the country more or less controlled, and the outreach of the propaganda was limited to the outreach of those media. Whereas today, things have changed dramatically. You have platforms who are, at least theoretically, not directly controlled by governments. Those are multinational companies, right? And they are service providers, they are intermediaries where you can just post your own stuff. But still, and this is my question now, what is your take on how much does the control of those companies play a role here? Because, you know, it is not just the attractiveness of the posting. Those are also the algorithms. So you can so easily control, you can ban something, or you can make it circulate way more widely. So I know we have mostly historians here. Probably we would love to have also somebody who brings competence in technologies, but still maybe you have some take on this. What is the role? Are they neutral, or do they influence the outreach? Because we have mostly American tech companies, but TikTok is owned by the Chinese companies. So this is my question.
Yeah, all right. So please, Professor Abraham, first to the minority question.
So I looking in my eyes of my friend Professor Matthias Weber, and he was very carefully with the time. So, Burkhard, the question regarding from the Romanian public opinion is that our members of the national community or larger community could be in danger. And this is the the problem in which public opinion says, okay, we are not give the arms, or are not involved with the arms in the people, or to the people in which not respect us, to be very blunt in my answer. Regarding your question, is very sophisticated, very long, and probably the first job that will be replaced by the artificial intelligence will be the lawyer, not the historian. Thank you.
Okay, José, you have the final word.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question. I absolutely agree with you, because there's something, there's a big difference between the past and now. But the thing is that we thought that censorship would have ended, and this is something that would spread. But we have noticed that censorship is still there, but in another way as it was in the past. And for example, regarding these new social networks, for example, in Instagram, they have external verifiers to control, or at least to ensure that certain information is not distributed, is not spread. And I didn't have time to show you an example of that, but if you access to certain information, to certain images or posts that are available on Instagram, we won't have access to that, and it will appear a short message saying external verifiers have checked that this information is not correct. So if you are you have the decision to read this information, but this information doesn't appear directly. And apart from that, the algorithm of this of Instagram, also TikTok, promotes certain information and hide another type of information. For example, I had big problems to find Russian examples because all of them were about Ukraine side, not Russian side. So there's something, there's that first step regarding external verifiers, for example, and there is also another example of which information is boosted and which information is less visible, in order to spread certain content and not another option or possibilities which are false or which needs to be verified.
Okay, thank you very much, José. Thank you very much to all our four presenters for their good and precise jobs. It is my honor right now to come to closing remarks, and this will be done by our hosts. First of all, Mr. Jan Rödel. He is pedagogical university professor in Krakow, and he's the co-host and the co-operator with the network. And the second one will be Mr. Matthias Weber. So, please, your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I have undertaken the difficult, if not impossible, task of summarizing our 3-day conference, during which we heard 38 contributions. It is naturally impossible to discuss or even list them all here. I can only share with my subjective impressions, and I will be fully satisfied if in my brief intervention I am able to outline the main strands of our debate. We began with a very strong speech by Professor Andrei Portnov, critical of the perception of his home country, Ukraine, in Germany and other Western countries. This emotional contribution by a distinguished intellectual automatically raised the temperature of our deliberations, which became characteristic of our entire conference. Following the panel title and the state of knowledge, or more often ignorance, the discussion between the participants in the panel, what should we have known known about Russia and Ukraine before the war, the limitations of European intellectual and political discourse focused on Ukraine. Professor Guido Hausmann spoke about the Germans' overestimation of the possibilities of civil society in Russia and underestimation of the imperial traditions in that country, as well as the different emotional attitude of Germans towards Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the other. Professor Marek Cichocki drew attention of the fundamental differentiation behind the word "we" in the panel title, as there was a clear conviction in the Central and Eastern European countries about the imperialist nature of Russian policy, while in the West, the nations of the post-Soviet area were seen as ethnies rather than political demoi. In this context, Martin Šimečka from Slovakia recalled the 2009 letter by former Presidents Havel, Wałęsa, Adamkus and others warning President Obama against Russia. In the panel Political Approaches to Central and Eastern Europe, Andrei Kolesnikov provided a convincing analysis of Russian perception of the collective West, and in doing so pointed out that until recently Germany had not been perceived as identical to this hostile collective West. With cast iron logic and full openness, Anna Kwiatkowska pointed out Germany's misjudgments and miscalculation prior to the Zeitenwende regarding the nature and future of Russian politics and German-Russian relations. Hans Christian Petersen described the attitude of the 4.5 million post-Soviet migrants currently living in Germany towards Putin's policy, and indicated that around 25% of them supported it. In a lively discussion between the panelists and the audience, the role of the mediator and Brückenbauer ascribed to Germany emerged. Andrzej Nowak summed it up by saying that no one saw anything wrong with building bridges except those who come to live under them. The final panel of the first day of the conference was entitled Russia's War in Ukraine between imperialists and self-destruction, imperialism and self-destruction, and brilliantly moderated by Christoph von Marschall. The very prominent panelists discussed many themes: the prospect of Russia's victory and Putin's continued rule, which fills Irina Sherbakova with dread, was refuted by Andrzej Nowak as both human life and empires had an irrevocable end. What was dangerous, however, was the short-term collusion of powers that would artificially sustain the existence and importance of Putin's Russia. Nowak also spoke about the two wars Russia was fighting: the material one, which it was not winning, and that of perception, in which Russia, past and present, had achieved great successes. Antoine Arżakowski and Marie-Louise Beck spoke about the overwhelming support of the people in France and Germany for Ukraine, and the failure of the governments of both countries to decide to deliver such broad support. In this context, Marie-Louise Beck mentioned the refutation of the political axiom, no more war. Irina Sherbakova drew attention to the disastrous consequences of Russia's failure to settle accounts with its Soviet past. Since 1994, it had caused Russia to turn into a zombie, which today threatened the world and which had to be annihilated. Part of this all means passionate debate was also argument about the nature and extent of the rootedness of Russian imperialism. In the panel discussion, European perceptual patterns and stereotypes of Russia and Ukraine, which opened the second day of conference, Maria Domańska spoke about misconceptions present in the West about the power and efficiency of Russian state, especially the Russian army, as well as the erroneous stereotype of the Czechist mafia ruling the Kremlin, the alleged weakness of Western democracies and Ukraine as an unready state. In the course of a lively discussion, she also mentioned the harmfulness of the Russia First principle and the obsession of caring about Russia's stability. Wilfried Ilge described the miscalculations of the West, assuming that Russia was basically only interested in Donbass and Luhansk for economic reasons, and not that it had a purely imperial intentions to control the whole of Ukraine. Alessandro Vitale characterized the modest state of knowledge of Italians about Russia and Ukraine and their consequent vulnerability to manipulation. The very lively discussion also included the subject of the wise use of the contemporary Russian political émigré milieu, as well as the need for European states to create instruments of deterrence and to prepare for the post-Putin era. The following panels were not debates by design, but based on short papers. The first was also devoted to the issue of European perceptual patterns and stereotypes of Russia and Ukraine. Burkhard Olszowski spoke about the evolution of the German Ostpolitik, while Oldřich Tuma, in a somewhat self-ironic intervention, presented the evolution of the Czechs' attitude towards Russia, leading them to their current Russophobia. Attila Pock explained the motives behind Hungary's policy toward the war and Ukraine, which was so different from that of the vast majority of Central and Eastern European countries. Juraj Maruszak presented the attitude of a strongly divided Slovak society and political scene towards the war in Ukraine. He drew attention to the mental unpreparedness of a large part of the country population for the events currently unfolding. The panel Culture and Art in the Face of the War confirmed the value of an interdisciplinary approach to serious historical and political issues. We learned about some artistic manifestations of Ukrainians' opposition and resistance to Russian aggression, as well as the sometimes crude, sometimes sophisticated, and at times even playful forms of using history in the struggle of control the visual perception of the war. In addition, we gained some insight into the plunder of cultural property in the course of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. In the panel Human Rights and the War as Judicial Issues, an international group of scholars, lawyers, considered various aspects of the problem of the future adjudication of war crimes, genocide as well as crimes against peace or crimes of aggression currently committed by the Russians in and against Ukraine. I omit the two-day panels because we all hear that. In conclusion, I would like to draw your attention to the rare climate of the conference, during which exceptionally difficult, controversial, and often painful problems from the intersection of history and politics were presented and discussed very openly and frankly, with the intention of getting to know different views and understanding arguments other than one's own. Creating a framework for such an exchange of ideas is one of the fundamental tasks of the European network, Remembrance and Solidarity. This objective is undoubtedly also close to the Documentation Center for Displacement, Expulsion, Reconciliation. So it is my pleasure to thank the excellent participants of our debates who differed beautifully and strongly, to quote the Polish poet Cyprian Kamil Norwid, differed beautifully and strongly. Myself, a silent observer, I would also like to thank emotions attached, the organizers of our conference who did not shy away from such differences and made sure there was adequate space available to present them. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the very last sentences of this two-day conference, but it's also a need for me to say a few words of thanks and farewell. Yes, Jan did it already. Thanks to the co-organizers, European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, Foundation Flight Expulsion, Reconciliation, and also to my colleagues from the Federal Institute in Oldenburg for perfect collaboration, cooperation, and during the implementation of the conference. It was very, very satisfying for me to see how it works and how the cooperation is functioning. Very thanks to you all behind in the organization for this. So I think this is worth a little short applause. Łukasz Kamiński admonished us to share our knowledge. This is what we will do, and I promise we will do our best in collaboration with our communication departments in ENRS, here in the foundation and in Oldenburg, and in cooperation with the IT specialists. You have observed the colleagues here who made the live streaming of the conference, and they will provide permanent streaming of the conference and availability in YouTube in both channels. So the conference will be placed permanently in the internet, and I hope so we can spread our communication information to public. Yes, publicity is very, very important topic. We had here, as you observed, in the program representatives of the press among us. This was not accidental. We had them here in the room as moderators, and virtually in the followers in YouTube. And we hope that they will promote our topic and spread it in future. And I can report that we have two articles in the Berliner Zeitung published today and yesterday about this conference. So it's reported to a big public here in Berlin, and it especially emphasizes the internationality and multi-perspectivity of this unique conference. So we are beginning to become to make the discussions known here in Germany, in Berlin. A conference of this kind costs a relatively large amount of money, and which is made available to us by politicians. So, I have to... Yeah,
by the state.
By the politicians of the states, maybe.
Because directly bribery.
Special thanks. So, special thanks to the ministers of culture of Poland, Hungary, Romania, to say that's right, Slovakia and Germany, and to the European Union. They all put the European network financially in a position to organize such events. As you know, the European network is a multilateral project led by the ministers of culture, and without their support, we could not make these events like this. So, thank you very much for this. This leads me to a very short look in the future, where we will continue with our engagement. The next major event of the European Network Remembrance Solidarity is the 11th European Remembrance Symposium. It will take place in Barcelona, in Spain, in May. And in October, we will be back here in Berlin with an historical event on the topic Remembrance and Solidarity in Europe, Potentials of a Common History Culture. Please find detailed information and news about this of the ENRS and our websites. You are invited to observe us, to follow us, and to join us also in future. Last but not least, a special thanks to the distinguished speakers and moderators, to all of you who gave different perspectives on Russia's war against Ukraine. It was really a great pleasure and a big honor to have you all here with us in Berlin. Thank you. Thank you to all, in the name also of Gundela Bavindam and Raphael. I say goodbye to you here in the conference room and on the screens. Wish you a good way home. I hope to see you again soon on another occasion, and above all in times of peace in Ukraine and all over Europe. Thank you and farewell.